Hey there, my name is Lilith and I'm the creator behind fashion art label Zigenthaler based in Australia, and I'm back with another tutorial today. Today I'm going to be showing you how you can paint your own minimal face line design on a shirt. Sort of like this one I got here. When I first started out, I did do a minimal line skull face drawing for a client once upon a time, and it was actually, still to this day, probably one of the most well-received designs that I've made for the client and for others alike. So I thought today would be a really good tutorial to show you how you can sort of create your own. It's a trendy design to have on clothing today. Can cater towards any sort of level of painting. It's very abstract and arty, it's got minimal paint coverage, and it can look really good. This is going to be like my flames tutorial I did, where this tutorial is going to be broken up into two segments. The first segment we will be looking at the elements of the design itself and workshopping on pencil and paper, and then the second half of this tutorial will be me showing you how I physically painted on the shirt, any tips I have, and any sort of tricks that I learnt along the way. So without further ado, let's get into it. So for this tutorial today, you will be needing a pencil and a paper. You're definitely going to need this for the workshop element of this tutorial. You will also be needing a pen. This is just going to help us develop our design. We also will be needing paintbrushes. Usually I have a couple of sizes on hand, but today I probably will just be using a thin paintbrush. We will also be needing fabric paint. I'm going to be using my preferred fabric paint brand, which is Color Opaque. I will be using a shimmer color. I find that shimmer colors work the most on dark fabrics, and I am working with a dark fabric today. And then you will also need an old shirt. I went to the op shop and I got this one for $5. I decided to go with a dark color because I tend to wear more dark colors, but you can use a white fabric and have a black fabric paint. The choice is up to you. Today I will be doing a dark shirt with a silver paint, just because I know that this paint will pop off of this fabric and will give me sort of the best result. You will also be needing fabric chalk to help map out your design, and you will also need a flat piece of scrap cardboard or plastic. We'll be needing this when we actually paint on the shirt, just to use as a guard to make sure that if our paint does go through our fabric, because it's thin, it won't actually transfer onto the back of the shirt. So into the first part of the tutorial, which is making these minimal faces. The good thing about this type of design is that these drawings are naturally very abstract, so you don't need to necessarily put an effort into having things in proportion, because having things slightly out of proportion and slightly more arty will actually add to the effect of this. What you want to be doing is you want to be getting your paper and your pencil, and the first thing I did was I sketched a circle, or like a face shape, and then I also sketched in the eyes and the mouth. I just got my pencil line and I decided to trace around the face and a lot of the features of the face, but doing it in a continuous line. The first time you do it, it may look a little bit funky. As I said, abstract is a good thing, but also you just need to practice. I did it a couple of times. There were some faces that I wasn't actually happy with, but it's fine because you just start again. It can help you sort of explore what you like to connect, whether that's like connecting the eyes and the eyebrows together, or how you would want to basically accentuate a face shape just with one line. If you are a beginner, you can actually just start out, and even for the final design for your t-shirt, you can just outline basic features like eyes and a mouth and a nose. Just a couple of things I wanted to point out in this phase of the tutorial, and that is Every single line on the face or every shape on a face doesn't necessarily have to be defined. I think one of the really cool things about this type of artwork is that it can create the illusion of a face without entirely outlining everything on it. So just keep that in mind. Even though I do say that you should trace the face over with one line, you don't necessarily have to. You can be very sneaky and sort of merge two lines into one if there's nowhere else you want to put a line. So you can just sort of tuck lines away. You can use different abstract lines to replace different parts of the face. This is just going to add a bit of mystery, a bit of allure, and as I said, just works off of the foundation that people who look at this type of art should be able to assume that it is a face. So you don't need to outline everything. A couple of the places that I think you should really pay attention to with this is a lot of the sharp lines in a facial structure. That is things like jawlines, chins, necks, cheekbones, and collarbones. And don't be afraid if you've already outlined a part of the face to go over that line again, not straight over the line, but like beside it. It's sort of just gonna create that sort of motion of sketching where some sort of pathways of the face are accentuated with 2 or 3 lines. But just make sure they're not on top of each other. We want to make sure that these lines are very clean, they're very delicate, they sort of lift off of the paper, and you don't want them to be dark and heavy because that's just sort of gonna take away from the sort of essence of these designs. When I was doing these faces, I sat down one night, I had a glass of wine, and I listened to some music, and I just did a couple of these just to experiment and see what I thought was good. So I did a couple of these drawings, and then what I did was the lines that I actually really liked, I went over in pen just to see sort of what variety I had in regards to what design I'd like to transfer onto a t-shirt. So I actually went on Pinterest and I found a particular design that I liked, and that was this sort of trendy design where you've got the bottom of a woman's face, but the top, her eyes are covered by flowers. So I decided to replicate this design. I also did a really cool design which had neck and collarbones in it, so I'm actually going to try and fuse those two together to create my design today. So on to the painting tutorial. First you want to figure out where you want to put it on the shirt. Today I'm actually just going to be putting my design on one side of the shirt. I am a fan of asymmetry, so I think this would look good. I might have part of the design go up around the shoulder and over the sleeves, and you are free to do the same depending on what you sort of developed in the workshop part of this tutorial. So what I did was I just laid this flat, and I took the scrap piece of cardboard or plastic and I put it in between the top front of the shirt and the back of the shirt. As I said, this is gonna sort of act as a guard because we are working with thin fabric today. Then I started to trace my design with fabric chalk on my garment. Because we're working with lines today, I can't stress enough that it's probably better for you to actually chalk out every single line that you're willing to paint. And this is probably the part of the tutorial that takes the most labor. Obviously, you want to make sure that everything is sort of the same from what it is on the paper to what it is on the shirt. But that's what the flexibility of fabric chalk gives you. You can rub out any lines that are mistakes, or I think if you just use a little bit of water and dab it on the shirt, you can wash out the line. For the most part, just make sure that you sort of lay down your lines very well, because we're basically just going to be going in with fabric paint and going over these lines. So once I did that, it is pretty straightforward. I just went in with my silver Cetacolor fabric paint. I went over all of these lines again. It will probably be in your best interest to use a thin paintbrush. I think my line is about 3 millimeters maybe. It's very important to make sure you have a thin line, because the thicker the line, the more bigger your design will have to be blown up onto the shirt. I sort of found this even with this paintbrush, my design is very detailed, and it actually came out bigger on the shirt than I obviously wanted it to. That was obviously because of the thickness of the paintbrush. Definitely try to go as thin as you can, as you possibly can. Obviously with painting, you can leave parts of a design and go off to move to another part and then gradually join all the lines together. I recommend that just so you don't smudge your paint. I just also wanted to interrupt. Don't put the shirt on straight away. Let it dry properly, because we are working with lines and a lot of negative space. A smudge is just going to, it's not going to ruin it, but it's just going to really just ruin your day. I did a video about 5 things you should know before you paint your denim jacket, and one of the things that I said in that video was let your paint dry. And every time I think back to that tip, I always think, oh, that's so basic. Like, who would not let their paint dry? But guess what happened? I don't know if you can see, but look at that. If you want more tips on how to paint on a denim jacket, definitely watch that video, but also just let your paint dry. Am I just impatient? Probably. So yep, that is the end of the tutorial. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you get a wonderful addition to your closet because of this. My biggest tip for this design is basically just finessing the design that you want on your shirt from the first part of this tutorial. A lot of good designs come from just being able to plan and sketch. You're basically just learning lines of a face. It's a very abstract type of design, so it doesn't have to be perfect, and it's also just a very trendy print to have on a shirt. So I also just wanted to add, to fuse this paint, obviously set a color opaque, you need to iron your fabric for 5 minutes. Because this is a thin fabric, what I like to do is iron it under a protective fabric of cotton or linen, or just like an old bed sheet or something, or an old tea towel. Usually you would iron the underside of this shirt, but because some of the paint may have actually gone through, you want to make sure not to iron the underside, because the paint will react very badly to a hot iron. So just make sure that you've got a protective cover of fabric over the top, and then iron this for 5 minutes, and then you can wash the chalk away. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Please make sure to subscribe if you want to see more tutorials on how to flip your clothes and paint on them. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video. Happy painting!